Hello friends, welcome back my YouTube channel. If you want to watch the super hit movie Thor: The Dark World in full HD, then first of all, give this video a like, and if you are visiting our channel for the first time, then subscribe to this channel. The name of the movie we're going to discuss in today's video is Thor: The Dark World. So we will give you information about how and where you will get to watch Thor: The Dark World film officially. Apart from this, we will give you a detailed look at the pre-production, post-production, budget, box office collection, and filming of this movie. A detailed review of the movie will also be given in this video, where we will explain the story of this movie in detail. We will also discuss the cast and casting performance of the movie. Apart from this, information about the music department and technical department will also be given. Because of this video is going to be very interesting and entertaining. So, you must watch this video till the end. And if you haven't liked this video yet, then like this video now and subscribe to this channel. So, let's start the video. Thor: The Dark World is a 2013 American superhero film based on the Marvel Comics character Thor, produced by Marvel Studios and distributed by Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures. It is the sequel to Thor 2011 and the 8th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, MCU. The film was directed by Alan Taylor from a screenplay by Christopher Yost and the writing team of Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely. It stars Chris Hemsworth as Thor alongside Natalie Portman, Tom Hiddleston, Stellan Skarsgård, Idris Elba, Christopher Eccleston, Adewale Akinnuoye-Agbaje, Kat Dennings, Ray Stevenson, Zachary Levi, Tadanobu Asano, Jamie Alexander, Rene Russo, and Anthony Hopkins. In the film, Thor and Loki Hiddleston team up to save the Nine Realms from the Dark Elves. Development of a sequel to Thor began in April 2011 when producer Kevin Feige announced plans for it to follow the MCU crossover film, The Avengers, 2012. In July, Thor director Kenneth Branagh withdrew from the sequel. Taylor was hired to replace him as director in January 2012. The supporting cast filled out that August with the hiring of Eccleston and Akinnuoye-Agbaje as the film's villains. Filming took place from September to December 2012, primarily in Surrey, England, as well as in Iceland and London. Taylor wanted the film to be more grounded than Thor, inspired by his work on Game of Thrones, 2011 to 2019. He hired Carter Burwell to compose the score, but Marvel replaced Burwell with Brian Tyler. Thor: The Dark World premiered at the Odeon Leicester Square in London on October 22, 2013, and was released in the United States on November 8th as part of Phase 2 of the MCU. The film was a commercial success, grossing over $644 million worldwide and becoming the 10th highest-grossing film of 2013. It received praise for the performances of Hemsworth and Hiddleston, visual effects, and action sequences, but was criticized for its generic villain and lack of depth. Retrospectively, Taylor expressed dissatisfaction with the film and said Marvel substantially altered it from his original vision during post-production. 2 sequels have been released: Thor: Ragnarok, 2017, and Thor: Love and Thunder, 2022. Plot: Eons ago, Bor, the father of Odin, wages war against the dark elf Malekith, who seeks to unleash a weapon known as the Aether on the Nine Realms. After defeating Malekith's forces on their homeworld of Svartalfheim, Bor sends the Aether to a hidden world that no one can reach. However, Malekith escapes with his lieutenant Algrim and a handful of dark elves before going into suspended animation. In present-day Asgard, Odin imprisons Loki for his various crimes on Earth. Meanwhile, Thor and his companions repel marauders on Vanaheim to pacify the Nine Realms following the reconstruction of the Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge between realms which was destroyed 2 years earlier. The Asgardians learn that the Convergence, a rare alignment of the Nine Realms, is imminent. As the event approaches, portals linking the worlds appear at random. In London, astrophysicist Dr. Jane Foster travels to an abandoned factory where such portals have appeared. Foster is teleported to the hidden world where the Aether is stored and it enters her body. Thor finds Foster and takes her to Asgard, where Odin warns that the Aether will not only kill her, but herald a catastrophic prophecy. Malekith, awakened by the Aether's release, attacks Asgard searching for Foster. Thor's mother Frigga is killed trying to protect her. Thor recruits Loki, who knows of a secret portal to Svartalfheim where they plan to confront Malekith to avenge Frigga. On Svartalfheim, Loki uses an illusion to trick Malekith into drawing the ether out of Foster, but Thor's attempt to destroy it fails. Malekith merges with the aether and leaves as Loki seemingly dies while killing Algrim. Thor and Foster reunite in London with Foster's mentor, Dr. Erik Selvig. They learn that Malekith plans to plunge the entire universe into darkness by unleashing the ether at the center of the convergence in Greenwich. Thor battles Malekith across multiple worlds, while Jane's group use their scientific equipment to transport Malekith to Svartalfheim, where he is crushed by his own ship. Thor returns to Asgard, where he declines Odin's offer to take the throne. After he leaves, Loki is revealed to be alive and impersonating Odin. In a mid-credits scene, Volstagg and Sif visit the Collector and entrust the ether to his care. With the Tesseract already in Asgard, they fear that having two Infinity Stones so close together would be dangerous. As they leave, the Collector states his desire to acquire the other 5 stones. In a post-credits scene, Foster and Thor reunite on Earth. Cast an Avenger and the Crown Prince of Asgard, based on the Norse mythological deity of the same name. Hemsworth stated that the film addresses unresolved issues regarding Thor's relationships from previous films. For Thor and Jane, there are some unanswered questions now, since obviously he didn't stop in and catch up with her in The Avengers, 2012. Thor might have some explaining to do in this one. And with Loki, we get down to the major bones of our conflict with everything that's come from Thor to Avengers to now. Hemsworth added, Thor's journey, I think, picks more so up from where we left the first one, about to take on the throne, and now coming to the realization of what responsibility comes with that. Also, Alan Taylor keeps talking about the dark side of that responsibility and the secrets of being king, or becoming sort of very political about what people need to know and what they want to know. Hemsworth especially enjoyed the role of Thor in this film, as he was able to break him down and find his human qualities and his vulnerable side. Natalie Portman as Jane Foster, an astrophysicist and Thor's love interest, who is brought from Earth to Asgard by Thor after she is infected with a mysterious energy. Producer Kevin Feige said, while Thor was a fish out of water on Earth in the first 2 films, Thor and the Avengers, this time, Jane is very much a fish out of water in Asgard. Portman added, it was a whole different adventure this time, because Jane is the fish out of water. I didn't want to make it like Bill and Ted, or like a valley girl dumped into Shakespeareland. Portman also said the film finds Jane at a different place in her life. Jane has moved, so she's now in London, not in Santa Fe anymore. Obviously, she has gone through missing Thor and also being upset at him because he didn't come knock on her door when he was on her planet. She's definitely been getting over that and trying to move on. Hemsworth's wife, Elsa Pataki, stood in for Portman during the post-credits kissing scene due to a scheduling conflict. Tom Hiddleston as Loki, Thor's adoptive brother and nemesis, based on the deity of the same name, who forms an uneasy alliance with Thor against the Dark Elves. On where he wished to take the character in the film, Hiddleston said, I'd like to take Loki to his absolute rock bottom. I'd like to see him yield, essentially, to his darkest instincts. Then, having hit rock bottom, maybe come back up. I think the fascination for me about playing Loki is that, in the history of the mythology and the comic books and the Scandinavian myths, is he's constantly dancing on this fault line of the dark side and redemption. Hiddleston recalled, when I met Alan Taylor, he asked me how I thought I could do Loki again without repeating myself, and I remembered talking with Kevin Feige when we were on the Avengers promotional tour. I said, okay, you've seen Thor and Loki be antagonistic for 2 films now. It would be amazing to see them fight side by side. I've been the bad guy now twice, so I can't be again, or otherwise I shouldn't be in the film. So we have to find a new role for me to play. Stellan Skarsgård as Erik Selvig. Foster's mentor and colleague Skarsgård said, the film finds Selvig in a disrupted mode, explaining, having a god in your head for a while creates some psychological problems, referring to the character's ordeal following the Avengers. Idris Elba, the all-seeing, all-hearing Asgardian sentry of the Bifrost Bridge, based on the mythological deity of the same name. Elba said he has a larger role in the sequel. In the new film, we're going to get to know Heimdall the Asgardian a bit better, and we're going to get to know Asgard a bit better. I can't say too much, but the expansion of Thor in his world is going to be huge. My part was very small and functional in the first film. Christopher Eccleston as Malekith, the ruler of the Dark Elves of Svartalfheim. About Malekith's motivation, Eccleston said, "There is a kind of tragic quality to his quest. Because he's lost his wife, he's lost his children, he's lost everything, and he returns for revenge, and the agent for his revenge is the Aether. If he gets hold of that, he is omnipotent." Eccleston continued, "What I thought about a great deal was revenge. There's huge amounts of revenge. One quote is, 'When you seek revenge, be sure to dig 2 graves.' I did a film called Revenger's Tragedy, where I played a guy called Vindisi, from the word vindictive, and he is the distillation of revenge. So in a way, that was what I had to think of, how revenge can make you absolutely monomaniacal, though you're still trying to make it recognizably motive-led. It's just the personification of movie evil." However, Taylor stated that many scenes involving Malekith's backstory had to be cut from the film to make it more efficient. Eccleston revealed that he speaks an invented language for the film, explaining, "The Elvish language is definitely based on European languages. I think there's probably some Finnish in there. It does have its logic and its rhythms. It also has many syllables, and it's very difficult to do while remaining naturalistic. It's been a particular challenge for us, but hopefully it gives the film some complexity and variety." Eccleston also said the role required 6 hours of makeup and 45 minutes in wardrobe. Adewale Akinnuoye-Agbaje as Algrim, a dark elf and Malekith's trusted and loyal lieutenant who is transformed into a monstrous creature in order to destroy Thor. Akinnuoye-Agbaje described Kursa as an amalgamation of a bull and a lava-like creature. He has very animalistic tendencies, but with this insatiable and unstoppable power. As an actor, that's one of the hardest things to embody. You have to realize you are probably the most powerful thing you could imagine, and you have to be that. You can't pretend so that when you face Thor, it's real. Akinnuoye-Agbaje stated the role required 3 hours of makeup a day and had to put on heavy-duty prosthetics, explaining, "The outfit weighed about 40 pounds. I'm sure there will be a certain amount of CGI, but a good 80% was me in that suit." About the character, Akinnuoye-Agbaje said, "I suppose Algrim and Curse would be the quintessential baddies, but in reality, they are what I perceive as the scorn and the victims of the story. They are the elves who have basically lost their planet and their race to another race, the Asgardians. Here is a man-alien who places a noble objective beyond his own life, and I think there is something extremely inspiring about that, because he looks at the bigger picture and sees himself as a means to that end." Akinnuoye-Agbaje added, "I worked with director Alan Taylor in trying to maintain Algrim's humanity all the way throughout Curse's transformation, so that even when you see Curse the Beast, you can still relate to him as being Algrim inside. And symbolically, we did that by keeping the same piercing blue eyes throughout." Kat Dennings as Darcy Lewis, a political science major who is interning for Foster. Her role in the film was expanded from the comic relief sidekick role she played in the first Thor film. Dennings said her character is really bad at real science in this first movie. In the second movie, she's more interested, but she still doesn't know anything about it. She loves Jane. She really wants Jane and Thor to be together. It's almost like her own little soap opera that she watches. Ray Stevenson as a member of the Warriors 3, a group of 3 Asgardian adventurers who are among Thor's closest comrades, known for both his hearty appetite and wide girth. About the character, Stevenson said, "He's got a heart the size of a planet that he wears on his sleeve, so he's like a big kid." Regarding Volstag's role in this film, Stevenson said, "Volstagg is struggling. He has a brood. The Warriors 3 are fighting for hearth and home as much as for the idea of Asgard itself. That's where he has trouble." Explaining, He's all too aware of how potentially threatening this new enemy is on both the home front and the battlefield. Zachary Levi as Fandral. A member of the Warriors 3, characterized as an irrepressible swashbuckler and romantic. Levi replaced Joshua Dallas in the role due to Dallas's commitment on Once Upon a Time. Levi had been up for the role in the first film, but bowed out due to his commitment on Chuck. Levi compared the character to Flynn Rider, the character he played in the animated feature, Tangled. Fandral is a little similar to Rider in some ways. He's like this Lothario. He's like Errol Flynn. He loves ladies, as do I. Regarding the dynamic of the Warriors 3, Levi said, "The Warriors 3 are here to support Thor. We are his confidants, his best friends. We've all grown up together in a lot of ways and fought many a battle together, escaped death. To me, it's the way best friends ought to be. They're there when you need to talk, and they're there if you don't want to talk, and they're there if you need to escape from your father's place in a flying skiff." Tadanobu Asano as Hogan, a member of the Warriors 3, native of Vanaheim, primarily identified by his grim demeanor. Jamie Alexander as Sif. An Asgardian warrior, Thor's childhood friend and Foster's romantic rival, based on the deity of the same name. Alexander said there is more character development for Sif, and the film explores the Sif-Thor relationship. Alexander elaborated, "I really tried to bring a little bit more vulnerability in this film. Sif is very much in love with Thor and very much cares about his well-being. So she kicks a lot of butt in this movie, but she also opens her heart a lot." Renee Russo as Frigga. The wife of Odin, queen of Asgard, mother of Thor, and adoptive mother of Loki, based on the mythological deity of the same name. Russo said that her role was expanded and explores Frigga's relationship with Loki. "You know, they cut me down in the first film. Kenneth Branagh sent me a nice note because he understood he's an actor. You move on. What are you going to do? But I think they're going to need a good mom in the next film. Loki needs his mom. I have a lot of compassion for Loki. But we might have to have a conversation about what he just did." Anthony Hopkins as Odin. The king of Asgard, father of Thor, and adoptive father of Loki, based on the deity of the same name who disapproves of Jane Foster being in Asgard. Regarding Thor's relationship with his father, Hemsworth said, "The conflict between Thor and Odin was so great in the first one, so certainly they disagree, as I think they always will at times, but there's a far greater respect from each other. So it becomes, I guess, a more mature conversation, but there's more at stake this time too. It's not sort of just their individual egos, the whole universe is at stake." As to his approach, Hopkins said, "I just play Odin like a human being, with maybe a little more dimension. I grow a beard, look hopefully impressive, and keep it as real as possible." Additionally, Alice Krige portrays Eir, an Asgardian physician, while Tallulah Riley plays an Asgardian nurse. Chris O'Dowd was cast as Richard, a suitor of Jane Foster's. Benicio del Toro, who plays Tanalir Tyvan, the Collector in Guardians of the Galaxy, 2014, appears in a mid-credits scene with Ophelia Lovibond, who plays his aide Karina Jonathan Howard plays Ian Boothby, Darcy's intern. Tony Curran plays Bor, Odin's father, based on the deity of the same name. Clive Russell plays Tyr, based on the deity of the same name. Richard Brake portrays a captain in the Einherjar. Chris Evans makes an uncredited cameo appearance as Loki, masquerading as Captain America, while Thor co-creator Stan Lee makes a cameo appearance as a patient in a mental ward. Production development. In April 2011, before the release of Thor 2011, Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige stated that following the Avengers 2012, Thor will go off into a new adventure. Kenneth Branagh, director of Thor, responded to his comments, saying, "It is kind of news to me. Here's what I would say to that. It's that I'm thrilled they're that confident. I shall wait for the audience to tell us whether there should be a second one. And then, if that's a nice conversation to be had among all of us, that'd be thrilling. But I've got too much Irish superstitious blood in me to assume that Thor 2 will happen. But if Marvel says so, then I guess it must be true." Feige later explained that Marvel Studios would gauge how well Thor did at the box office before announcing sequels, but stated, "Don Payne is working on story ideas for a part 2, We've got various options with Ken Branagh to discuss coming back, but right now the focus is on the first one. Don is, slowly but surely, thinking about where to take the character next should we be so lucky. In June 2011, Walt Disney Studios set a July 26, 2013 release date for the Thor sequel, with Chris Hemsworth reprising his role as the title hero. It was also reported that Branagh would not be returning as director, but would likely be involved in a producing capacity. The Los Angeles Times cited the long commitment necessary for a special effects-heavy epic and the pressure to start the script process right away as reasons for Branagh's departure, although he was initially enthused by the chance to direct the sequel. Branagh noted, "It was a long time making the first film, and they were way too quick for me to get straight back into another, but it was a pleasurable experience and a film I'm very proud of." The following day, Marvel formally hired Payne, one of the credited writers of the first film, to script the sequel. An early version of the film planned to feature Gila as the film's antagonist. However, Marvel Studios producer Craig Kyle explained that the creative committee from Marvel Entertainment was driving most of the decisions for the film and did not want a female villain because they did not believe they could sell toys based on her to young boys. In August, Brian Kirk entered early negotiations to direct the Thor sequel. The film would have marked Kirk's first time directing a big-budget motion picture, after having directed television series for HBO, Showtime, and the BBC, including Game of Thrones, 2011 to 2019. In September 2011, Tom Hiddleston confirmed he would return in the sequel, speculating that in the film, Loki will have to take responsibility for what he's done. Patty Jenkins, the director of Monster 2003 and the pilot episode of AMC's The Killing 2011-2014, entered early negotiations with Marvel Studios and Disney to direct the film after Kirk had passed due to contractual sticking points that arose during negotiation. Later in the month, Feige stated the sequel would take Thor literally to other worlds and would primarily be the journey of that character, of he and Jane Foster, and how the new dynamic with his father is working out, as well as what are the broader stakes for the 9 worlds. On October 13, 2011, Marvel confirmed that Jenkins would direct the sequel and Natalie Portman would return to star. Disney also moved the release date for the film to November 15, 2013. Pre-production. In December 2011, Jenkins exited the project, citing creative differences. She stated, "I have had a great time working at Marvel. We parted on very good terms, and I look forward to working with them again." Jenkins felt she could not have made a good film out of Thor 2 because I wasn't the right director. I could have made a great Thor if I could have done the story that I was wanting to do. But I don't think I was the right person to make a great Thor out of the story they wanted to do. Jenkins had intended to create a film based on the premise of Romeo and Juliet, where Jane was stuck on Earth with Thor forbidden to come save her. After Thor eventually does travel to Earth, he and Jane would have discovered that Malekith was hiding the dark energy inside of Earth because he knows that Odin doesn't care about Earth. And so he's using Odin's disinterest in Earth to trick him. 3 days later, it was reported that Marvel was looking at Alan Taylor and Daniel Minahan as prospective directors to replace Jenkins, and were also in the midst of hiring a writer to rewrite Don Payne's script, with the shortlist of possible writers consisting of John Colley, Robert Rodat, and Roger Avery. At the end of the month, Alan Taylor, best known for directing episodes of the HBO fantasy series Game of Thrones, was chosen to direct the sequel. Feige mentioned Taylor's work on the series Mad Men 2007-2015, Boardwalk Empire 2010-2014, and Game of Thrones as reasons for his hiring, saying, "With Alan's direction, we got a few more layers of patina, of texture, of reality into our golden realm." As Feige looked at what worked for the first Thor film and thought what he could retool from that, Taylor decided to bring some Game of Thrones to it in order to make a darker and more grounded sequel in comparison to Branagh's work in the previous film. By January 10th, Marvel Studios had commissioned screenwriter Rodat to rewrite the sequel, and Hiddleston stated that filming was expected to begin in London in the summer of 2012. Hemsworth later confirmed that filming was scheduled to begin in August. Hemsworth also revealed that the film would have a more Viking-influenced feel, elaborating, "I think the science fiction element to Thor. The danger is it falls a little bit into the world of it's tough to throw a light to. I think of big waterfalls and mountains and a Viking influence, where the Norse mythology kind of grew from. Having that in Asgard is going to make it all the more special, and that's what Alan Taylor wants to bring to it." Feige said, while the relationship between Loki and Thor certainly has changed after the events of the movie The Avengers and has progressed, a lot of Thor 2 is picking up where it left off in terms of Jane, who you just saw for a moment on a computer monitor, and also what's been going on in the Nine Realms without the Asgardians being able to use the Bifrost. Feige also said that while Loki has a part, there will be a different villain, another big villain. In May 2012, Mads Mikkelsen began talks to play one of the villains in the film, and Anthony Hopkins, who played Odin in the first film, committed to returning in the sequel. Benedict Cumberbatch, who eventually joined the film series as Stephen Strange, Doctor Strange, was also in the running to play Malekith, the Accursed Hind. At the end of the month, Disney moved up the release date for the film a week ahead of the previous date to November 8, 2013. By June 2012, much of the first film's supporting cast was confirmed to return, including Idris Elba, Jamie Alexander, Ray Stevenson, and Stellan Skarsgård. Also in June, Joshua Dallas announced that he would not be reprising the role of Fandral. Dallas had initially intended to return, but had to bow out due to his commitment on the television show Once Upon a Time, 2011 to 2018, and Zachary Levi was cast in his place. Levi was originally up for the role in the first film, but scheduling conflicts with Chuck, 2007 to 2012, forced him to drop out. In July 2012, Mikkelsen stated he would not be appearing in the sequel due to prior commitments. That's not happening, unfortunately. I had a meeting with the filmmakers, but it was a bit too late, and then Hannibal came in. It's just not happening. At the 2012 San Diego Comic-Con, it was announced that the film would be titled Thor: The Dark World. At the end of the month, residents near Bourne Wood in Surrey, England were notified that a film going by the working title Thursday Morning would be filming in the area in August of that year. Christopher Eccleston entered final negotiations to play Malekith, and the film was scheduled to shoot in Iceland, where Taylor shot parts of Game of Thrones. By August 22nd, Kat Dennings was hired to reprise her role as Darcy Lewis, and Adewale Akinnuoye-Agbaje was cast as Algrim. At the end of the month, film crews for Thursday Morning began set construction at Stonehenge near Amesbury, England. Filming principal photography began on September 10, 2012, in Bourne Wood, Surrey, England, under the working title Thursday Morning. A few weeks later, Clive Russell was cast as Tyr, and Richard Brake was cast as an Einherjar captain. At the end of the month, Jamie Alexander was injured on the London film set after she slipped while walking in the rain. On October 12, 2012, production moved to Iceland, with filming taking place in Dómadalur, Skogafoss, Fjaðrárglúfur, and Skeiðarársandur. Iceland Review described the shoot as being among the most extensive film projects to have ever taken place in Iceland. The film's official synopsis was released, which revealed that Christopher Yost and Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely had also contributed to the screenplay. Marcus and McFeely said Feige had approached them in between writing drafts for Captain America: The Winter Soldier, 2014, to work on the Dark World script. 3 days later, Disney announced that the film would be released in 3D. In late October, filming commenced at the Old Royal Naval College in Greenwich, London. Filming also took place at Shepperton Studios and Longcross Studios in Surrey between October and December 2012. Other filming locations included Wembley, Borough Market, Hayes, and Stonehenge. Alexander tweeted that principal photography wrapped on December 14, 2012. In a 2013 report on film production costs for films from Film LA Inc., indicated a gross budget of $170 million, with a UK tax offset of $17.3 million for Thor: The Dark World. In 2016, Disney company accounts stated the budget spend was $237.6 million on Thor: The Dark World, but $37 million of this was offset by payments from the UK tax authority. Kramer Morgenthau, who worked with Taylor on Game of Thrones, was brought in as the director of photography. Morgenthau said, "We wanted a grittier, boots-on-the-ground feeling, inspired by what Alan and I had done on Game of Thrones. We wanted the realms to feel grounded, like a real place, while at the same time respecting the magical Planet of the Gods feeling and theme." Thor: The Dark World was Morgenthau's first time shooting a feature film digitally. For the film, Morgenthau chose the Arri Alexa Plus, although he tested with the Sony F65 but found the Alexa to be more pleasing. In addition to the Alexa, Red Epic and Canon EOS 5D Mark II cameras were used for second unit filming. With the Alexa, Morgenthau used Panavision anamorphic lenses. Morgenthau said, "The lenses brought some of the magic and mystery of photochemical back to digital, that big movie look." Morgenthau also stated that Thor: The Dark World was easily the most technically complex project that he has worked on, but said, "It's all the same concept and the same principles as in a smaller film. You just scale it up. You do a lot more prep. We had 3 months of prep and loads of time to pre-rig stages. Part of it is having a really good crew. It's definitely not a one-man show." Post-production. In April 2013, McFeely said that a lot of writers had contributed to the film's script, and he and Marcus were uncertain if they would receive final screenwriting credit on the film. 94. Marcus and McFeely, along with Yost, received final screenwriting credit, with Payne and Rodat receiving story credit. In July 2013, Dennings told reporters that the film was about to head into reshoots. In August, Taylor said he shot extra scenes with Hiddleston and was about to shoot more with Hopkins. Taylor explained that it was all a part of the Marvel process, saying, "We're doing full scenes, scenes that were not in the movie before. We're adding scenes, creating scenes, writing scenes for the first time. The one involving Loki was a fun, connective scene. We realized how well Loki was working in the movie, and we wanted to do more with him." So, it was that kind of thing. It was like, oh, we could do this. We could jam this in here, because he's such a wonderful guy to watch do his stuff. Also in August, IMAX Corporation and Marvel Entertainment announced that the film would be digitally remastered into the IMAX 3D format and released into IMAX 3D theaters internationally beginning October 30th, 2013. Taylor said, "The Avengers writer-director Joss Whedon rewrote several scenes in the film, explaining, 'Joss came in to save our lives a couple of times. We had a major scene that was not working on the page at all in London, and he basically got airlifted in, like a SWAT team or something. He came down, rewrote the scene, and before he got back to his plane, I sort of grabbed him and said, and this scene, and this scene? And he rewrote 2 other scenes that I thought had problems." In October 2013, Tony Curran tweeted that he would be portraying Odin's father, Bor, in a flashback sequence. In November 2013, Feige stated that the film was intended to be the conclusion of the Loki trilogy, which examined the relationship of Thor and Loki throughout Thor, the Avengers, and this film. Loki was originally intended to die in the film. However, after test audiences did not believe he was actually dead, Marvel Studios decided to alter the character's ending. The film's mid-credits scene was directed by James Gunn, the director of Marvel Studios' Guardians of the Galaxy 2014. The film underwent multiple changes during the reshoots and editing process, with Taylor believing his initial version had more childlike wonder, including starting the film with children and an overall, more magical quality. He noted the reshoots inverted the original plot in certain ways, such as Loki no longer dying. The film's visual effects were completed by 7 special effects studios, including Double Negative and Luma Pictures. Blur Studio was the lead studio behind the film's prologue sequence taking place 5,000 years before the start of the film, on the Dark Elves' homeworld of Svartalfheim. The sequence consisted mostly of computer graphics with live action shots interwoven throughout. The use of CG allowed for greater freedom of movement by the characters as the live-action costumes were too constrictive. Taylor wanted Asgard in this film to have a more natural look than its predecessor. To achieve this, crews filmed the coast of Norway with an Arri Alexa camera for 3 days in a helicopter, capturing 6 hours of footage. Double Negative then embedded their CG rendering of Asgard on shots of the natural landscape. Double Negative visual effects supervisor Alex Wutke said, "The benefit of that is that you have some real-world terrain to work with. So you have buildings that have to convey natural features. Then from there, we went in there populating the terrain with different buildings. For scenes taking place on Svartalfheim, production filmed in Iceland with Double Negative, adding ruins, mountains, dark elf ships, and skies. For the shot of the levitating truck, which was used in the film to demonstrate the strange phenomena brought on by the coming of the alignment of the worlds, filmmakers attached a cement truck to a large hydraulic rig, which could be programmed to change speed and movement. In order to create Algrim's transformation into Cursey, Double Negative morphed live-action performances of Adewale Akinnuoye as both Algrim and Cursey. Double Negative then added in smoke and lava-like effects. The film's climactic battle sequence takes place through the 9 worlds by the use of portals. Visual effects supervisor Jake Morrison said, "We ended up calling this time toffee, so as you punch through from one realm to another, it's almost like cling film or a slightly gelatinous membrane you have to pass through. It bends a little bit, then rips and spits the person out." The other thing we wanted to do was to make sure it was quite fast from an editorial point of view. In the fight scenes, there are times when Thor and Malekith are portaling all over the place, quite frankly. We made sure we always kept up the momentum and never stopped the fight. It was a way of making sure the audience weren't conscious there was an effect going on. Music. Main article, Thor: The Dark World. In August 2012, Patrick Doyle said that he had discussions with the director about potentially returning to score the film. By April 2013, Carter Burwell had been hired to compose the score, but by the following month, he left the film over creative differences. In June 2013, Marvel hired Brian Tyler, who scored Iron Man 3 2013, to replace Burwell. Tyler said the previous film had an attitude and was with it grounded in limitations, whereas the Thor film allowed for all-out regal themes that could be as epic as I could make them. The composer described The Dark World as science fiction meeting classic medieval war, leading to a score that drew from works of both genres, such as Star Wars and The Lord of the Rings. Azam Ali is a featured vocalist on the score. The soundtrack was released digitally on October 28, 2013. Marketing. In March 2013, Marvel announced the release of a 2-issue comic book prelude by writers Craig Kyle and Christopher Yost and artist Scott Eaton in June 2013. In April 2013, Marvel released the first trailer for Thor: The Dark World. Forbes said, "This trailer fits nicely into that larger marketing push for Marvel's brand. It puts all of the recognizable characters from the first film front and center, presents the action as a team event reminiscent of the Avengers, and once again Loki, who was quite popular with audiences, makes an appearance." The Los Angeles Times said, "Evident throughout the trailer is director Alan Taylor's influence. The Game of Thrones director's hand can be seen in the battle sequences, and Asgard, a bright and shiny kingdom under Thor director Kenneth Branagh, seems grittier in the sequel." In July, at the 2013 San Diego Comic-Con, Hiddleston introduced footage from the film to audiences in character as Locke. Also in July, Gameloft announced that a mobile video game titled Thor: The Dark World, the official game, would be released in conjunction with the release of the film in November. The theatrical poster for the film was released in early August 2013. Kirsten Acuna of Business Insider criticized the poster for its lack of originality, noting its similarities to one of the posters of Iron Man 3, both of which included the female lead clinging to the male lead, with both looking in opposite directions, antagonists prominently displayed in the background, and supporting characters featured on the side. Additionally, Marvel released a second trailer for the film, as part of YouTube's Geek Week. Forbes said, "This 150-second trailer is basically just an extended version of last April's 106-second teaser, and that this trailer fails to showcase what's new this time around, making audiences question if they really don't have much else to offer." The Los Angeles Times said that the trailer suggests an ominous, epic scale for the sequel, and that the collaboration between Thor and Loki promises to be especially interesting. Later in the month, producer Kevin Feige and cast members Tom Hiddleston, Natalie Portman, and Anthony Hopkins presented additional footage at Disney's D23 Expo. Also in August 2013, Disney announced plans to promote the film with an attraction at Disneyland. The attraction, called Thor: Treasures of Asgard, located next to the Stark Industries exhibit inside Innoventions in Tomorrowland, opened on November 1, 2013, and features displays of Asgardian relics and transports guests to Odin's throne room, where they are greeted by Thor. The 8th episode of Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., titled The Well, takes place in the aftermath of the events of Thor: The Dark World. It first aired on November 19, 2013. Jamie Alexander reprised her role as Sif in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. episode Yes Men, which aired on March 11, 2014. Release: Theatrical. The world premiere of Thor: The Dark World took place on October 22, 2013, at the Odeon Leicester Square in London. The film was released theatrically in the UK 8 days later, on October 30th. The film held its North American premiere at the El Capitan Theater in Hollywood, Los Angeles, and was released into U.S. theaters on November 8, 2013. Thor: The Dark World is part of Phase 2 of the MCU. Home media. Thor: The Dark World was released by Walt Disney Studios Home Entertainment for digital download on February 4, 2014, and on Blu-ray disc, 3D Blu-ray, and DVD on February 25, 2014. The physical media release includes deleted scenes, extended scenes, a gag reel, audio commentary by the cast and crew, and a Marvel one-shot short film entitled All Hail the King, featuring Ben Kingsley reprising his role as Trevor Slattery from Iron Man 3. The film was also collected in a 13-disc box set titled Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 2 Collection, which includes all of the Phase 2 films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was released on December 8, 2015. Reception. Box office. Thor: The Dark World earned $206.4 million in North America and $438.4 million in other markets for a worldwide total of $644.8 million. It surpassed the gross of its predecessor after just 19 days of its release. Deadline Hollywood calculated the film's net profit as $139.4 million when factoring together all expenses and revenues for the film. Thor: The Dark World made an estimated $7.1 million in Thursday night showings, more than double the midnight gross of its predecessor. On Friday, November 8, 2013, the film topped the box office with $31.9 million, including Thursday night earnings, which is 25% higher than the original film's opening day gross. Through Sunday, the film remained at the number 1 spot with $85.7 million, which is a 30% increase over its predecessor's opening weekend. This was the largest November opening for a film distributed by Disney, surpassing The Incredibles. Thor: The Dark World topped the box office in North America during its first 2 weekends before being overtaken by The Hunger Games: Catching Fire in its 3rd weekend. On its midweek opening day of Wednesday, October 30th, 2013, Thor: The Dark World earned $8.2 million from 33 territories, including the United Kingdom and France, where it opened higher than its predecessor. During its first 3 days, the film earned $45.2 million, and by the end of the weekend, after expanding into 3 more territories, it totaled $109.4 million over 5 days, finishing in first place in all 36 countries. Its largest openings were recorded in China, $21 million, the United Kingdom, $13.8 million, and France, $9.94 million. It topped the box office outside North America on its first 3 weekends of release in total earnings. Its largest markets are China, $55.3 million, Russia and the CIS, $35.7 million, Brazil, $27.7 million, and the United Kingdom, $26.2 million. Critical response. The review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes reported an approval rating of 67%, with an average score of 6.210 based on 290 reviews. The website's consensus reads, "It may not be the finest film to come from the Marvel Universe, but Thor: The Dark World still offers plenty of the humor and high-stakes action that fans have come to expect." It was the lowest-rated MCU film on Rotten Tomatoes until the release of Eternals in 2021. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned a score of 54 out of 100 based on 44 reviews, indicating mixed or average reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an A average based on a grading scale ranging from A+ to F. Ben Child of The Guardian said, "Thanks to Hiddleston and Hemsworth's impressive collective charisma, Thor: The Dark World is far from a franchise killer." Justin Chang of Variety wrote, "This robust, impersonal visual effects showpiece proves buoyant and unpretentious enough to offset its stew of otherwise derivative fantasy action elements." Alonso Duralde of The Wrap said, "Thor: The Dark World delivers the goods. Action, otherworldly grandiosity, romance, above and beyond its predecessor." Simon Abrams, writing for RogerEbert.com, said, "There's just enough tension and humor in Thor: The Dark World to make the film's otherwise listless proceedings worth watching, but only just." Conversely, Tim Roby of the Daily Telegraph said, "It feels entirely made by committee, the definition of house style without a personal stamp in sight." Leslie Felperin of The Hollywood Reporter said, "Although director Alan Taylor manages to get things going properly for the final battle in London, the long stretches before that on Asgard and the other branches of Yggdrasil are a drag, like filler episodes of Game of Thrones, but without the narrative complexity, mythical heft, or all-pervading sexiness." Michael Phillips of the Los Angeles Times described Thor: The Dark World as having the same old threats of galaxy annihilation spiced with fairly entertaining fish-out-of-water jokes. Jeanette Katsoulis of the New York Times said, "The battle scenes are as lacking in heat and coherence as the central love story." Taylor expressed dissatisfaction with the finished film and blamed its mixed reception on changes Marvel Studios made during post-production, which he felt conflicted with his creative vision. In 2015, he called working on The Dark World a particularly wrenching experience and said in 2021 that the experience made him hesitant to continue directing. Taylor expressed interest in creating a director's cut similar to Zack Snyder's Justice League 2021, though he observed that Marvel was likely not interested in it. Further information: list of Marvel Cinematic Universe films. Thor: Ragnarok. Main article: Thor: Ragnarok. Thor: Ragnarok was released on November 3, 2017, directed by Taika Waititi. Eric Pearson and Craig Kyle and Christopher Yost wrote the screenplay, with Kevin Feige again producing. Hemsworth, Hiddleston, Hopkins, Elba, Asano, Levi, and Stevenson reprised their roles as Thor, Loki, Odin, Heimdall, Hogun, Fandral, and Volstagg, respectively, while Mark Ruffalo and Benedict Cumberbatch appear as Bruce Banner, Hulk, and Doctor Strange, respectively. Reprising their roles from previous MCU films, Cate Blanchett, Tessa Thompson, Jeff Goldblum, and Karl Urban joined the cast as Hela, Valkyrie, Grandmaster, and Scourge, respectively. Thor: Love and Thunder. Main article: Thor: Love and Thunder. A fourth film titled Thor: Love and Thunder was released on July 8, 2022. Hemsworth, Thompson, and Elba reprised their roles with Portman, Alexander Dennings, and Skarsgård returning after not appearing in Ragnarok. Portman portrayed her character taking on the mantle of Thor, similar to the comics. Additionally, Chris Pratt, Pom Klementieff, Dave Bautista, Karen Gillan, Vin Diesel, Bradley Cooper, and Sean Gunn reprised their roles as Guardians of the Galaxy members Peter Quill, Star-Lord, Mantis, Drax the Destroyer, Nebula, Groot, Rocket, and Kraglin Obfontari. Christian Bale joined the cast as the villain Gore the God Butcher. Late in Thor: The Dark World, Chris Hemsworth's title character crash lands on a British underground platform. He's dazed, but knows that he has to get back to fighting Malekith, ex-Doctor Who Christopher Eccleston, a malevolent dark elf. Thor asks for directions back to Greenwich and promptly boards the train. As the train lurches forward, a woman falls onto his broad chest. He smiles knowingly. This scene is one of several high points in Thor: The Dark World. a blocky fantasy adventure whose plot is never as exciting as its characters. All three Iron Man films have this same basic problem, but story was never more important than personality in those earlier films. Thor: The Dark World's characters are often very charming, but they're only so much fun when they're stuck going through the motions. Thor: The Dark World mostly concerns Malekith's Transformers, worthy schemes. Malekith was previously put in his place by Bor, Thor's grandfather, when he tried to turn matter back into antimatter using Aether, an ancient, all-powerful energy source. Now, after Jane Foster, Natalie Portman, Thor's super-smart human scientist not-quite-girlfriend, stumbles upon some ether, Malekith returns. Leading an armada of black splinter-shaped spaceships, he sets out for Asgard, home of Thor and his fellow Norse gods. But the Asgardians are still recovering from Thor's half-brother Loki's, Tom Hiddleston, recent failed coup. Now, Thor and Loki must team up to save Jane, Earth, Asgard, and the other 8 realms of existence from complete annihilation. Malekith may be a major threat to life and the universe as we know it, but he's just one of a handful of characters who are run through their paces in Thor: The Dark World. This sequel is consistently unfocused in that sense. Major characters get to flex their muscles for a scene or two, but only when they're absolutely needed. There are a couple of scenes where characters get to be both important and exciting, like when Curse, Adewale, Mr. Echo Akinuoyagbaje, Malekith's superpowered henchman, breaks into Asgard and starts a prison riot. But there are just as many scenes where inherently exciting characters, like Thor, kill time connecting plot points. Watching Thor make quick work of an inconsequential enemy in an opening scene should be fun. But the scene has no flair to it and feels like a perfunctory introduction to the character. The first scene in the film where Hemsworth gets to be really charming comes later, when he's squabbling with Hiddleston about operating a commandeered dark elven spaceship. The squabbling itself isn't that funny, but the scene's payoff is. Hemsworth's eyes light up as he gets the ship to fly, instantly reminding you why you came in the first place. Still, more often than not, Thor: The Dark World is more busy than exciting. There are a couple subplots too many, like the one with frequently naked super scientist Erik Selvig, Stellan Skarsgård, and too many characters that are introduced with a promising scene, like Rainbow Bridge Guardian Heimdall, Idris Elba, are forgotten during the film's climactic battle. The film's world also generally looks slapped together, especially the Dark Elves, who look like a cross between Land of the Lost, Sleestaks, and Doctor Who's Cybermen. Visually, Thor: The Dark World is a step back after Thor, which at least looked unique enough. But in most other respects, Thor: The Dark World is a step in the right direction. The scene where Thor enlists Loki's help is a perfect example of the film's slight but memorable improvements. The conversation they have is inconsequential, but watching a defeated Loki surrounded by overturned furniture and a reddish-brown PG-13 blood substitute on his prison cell's walls makes the scene worthwhile. Hemsworth and Hiddleston have such good chemistry that it sometimes looks like Thor and Loki will kiss before Thor and Jane will. There's just enough tension and humor in Thor: The Dark World to make the film's otherwise listless proceedings worth watching, but only just. Thor: The Dark World Review. This new Thor film delivers a hammer blow of boredom to the back of the head. It is another franchise product from the Marvel pipeline, conceived without much inspiration in a CGI green screen world, and without the sprightliness and novelty of the previous Thor outing, directed by Kenneth Branagh. Chris Hemsworth returns as the great god, still carrying a torch, as well as that hammer, for his earthling love, astrophysicist hottie Jane Foster, gamely played by Natalie Portman. But now he faces a new enemy, the apocalyptically boring Malekith, leader of the Dark Elves, played by Christopher Eccleston, and hell-bent on unleashing a fog of dullness on the universe. Malekith stands around glowering with pale-faced, pointy-eared resentment, like a mature student who has been thrown out of a goth pub for smoking. Catastrophically, this development downgrades the status of this franchise's star performer, Thor's wicked brother Loki, played by Tom Hiddleston. Loki is, once again, languishing in Lecter-esque imprisonment, and Hiddleston brings to it all the usual silky-voiced malice, wit, and fun, like James Mason's wicked great-nephew. He's given a bit to do when Thor realizes he must make common cause with this duplicitous sibling to defeat Malekith. But his sidelining is a big disappointment. Even Hiddleston can't rescue this Norse epic of tedium. The 9 realms are going to converge upon one another, which will allow the nefarious Dark Elves, led by the perpetually pissed-off Makith, Christopher Eccleston, to destroy Asgard and plunge the universe into darkness. Quite a mouthful, and that's just the exposition. Using an ancient, seemingly unlimited energy force known as the ether, pronounced ether, which looks like fruit juice in zero gravity, is how Molech and his constantly scowling army plan to take over the world. To make it personal, Thor's go-to astrophysicist, love interest Jane Foster, Natalie Portman, accidentally becomes the host organism for the ether, which is slowly killing her and also makes her a constant target for Moab goons. While I didn't buy Portman as a N, astrophysicist, and B having a life's work in the last film, she is more palatable this time around. Perhaps because she's given a bit more to do than just stand around looking surprised. Still, the film's tendency to play up her simply pining away for Thor grew a bit stale by the end. Then again, I may just be a die-hard member of Team Sif, where the film really shines is in its exploration of the dynamic between Thor and Loki, Hiddleston. Hiddleston's portrayal of Loki as a wounded sociopath who craves power and acceptance in equal measure has elevated the character beyond mere megalomaniac of the weak status. The God of Thunder has long had a contentious relationship with his half-giant, half-brother, but with him trying to destroy Asgard and unleashing an alien invasion on New York City. And now imprisoned in a cell beneath the Asgardian palace and increasingly restless, Loki is at his wit's end, particularly when his actions during an elven invasion lead to truly horrific and personal consequences. Unable to trust each other, but bound together by blood and fate, Loki and Thor must work together to save Jane Foster and the universe itself. Hiddleston and Hemsworth clearly have an excellent rapport and trust each other inherently, giving their scenes an easy charisma and a wonderful back and forth, especially during a certain hallway sequence. Thor, the dark world that is slow to start and its initial blend of sci-fi and high fantasy is jarring. Did Askew it always come off like Viking space aliens? Maybe I just didn't remember. It quickly finds its footing and offers up sumptuous visuals, a sweeping story, and enough laughs to make this one of the better offerings in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It sure as here isn't a perfect film, but I is here of a lot of fun. And when it comes to superhero flicks, that is just what Dr. Donald Blake ordered. However, we don't recommend that you show up right at the end. Come for the stings. Stick around for the previous 100 minutes of people talking and fighting and whatnot, and you'll be rewarded with the thrilling and often surprisingly funny reminder that following Avengers Assemble and Iron Man 3, nobody is better than Marvel at this blockbuster business right now. Acutely aware of the dangers of audience fatigue. A case in point, The Dark World is Thor's third big screen appearance in as many years. A Kevin Feige, who produces all the studio's films, appears determined never to make the same film twice. But so where Kenneth Branagh's introduction to Thor was a charming, cheesy, even campy fish-out-of-water comedy, Alan Taylor's The Dark World is a tonally, visually, thematically, a different kettle of bilge snipe on a much bigger scale than the relatively low-key first installment. At times, it even feels like a sci-fi war movie. The one thing it doesn't feel like, even though it's the character can fly and is virtually indestructible, is a superhero movie. It also feels very different from last year's Avengers Assemble, even though there are occasional callbacks to that movie, including a lovely riff on the Shaw Wareen and a nice cameo from, well, we won't say. First and foremost, though, this is laid out as a sequel to Thor. Structurally, it begins in the same way with a slightly clunky prologue, a complete with pretentious voiceover from Anthony Hopkins as Odd Exposition A, that sets up both the film's main villains, the Dark Elves and the Ether. An all-powerful source of dark matter that might as well be called the MacGuffin. From there, though, it hits the ground running, definitely reintroducing the key players from Odin to Tom Hiddleston's Loki, bound for the dungeons. After that kerfuffle in New York, and Natalie Portman's Jane Foster, now living in London and going on an extremely awkward blind date with a potential new boyfriend. A fun cameo from Chris Odo, who doesn't stand a chance of living up to her previous boyfriend, the God of Thunder, which brings us neatly to the main man. For the most part, Marvel has an uncanny knack for casting just the right person to make their comic book characters flesh in the wrong hands. Thor could have been an utterly ridiculous character, an ABOP demigod who looks like he's on a gap year just finding himself man and who speaks with the oldie English twang. And yet Chris Hemsworth managed to make it work from the get-go, bringing charm and power to the role. Getting back on the Norse here, the Australian actor comports himself with admirable ease, handling the comedic and dramatic aspects equally adroitly as a rapidly maturing Thor is. Forced to rebel against his stubborn father in order to save Asgard and the rest of the Nine Realms. The day Hemsworth puts the hammer down will be a shame. Likewise, Hiddleston and Loki, the English actor, is simply indelible in the role now as adept at a devilish one-liner. It's not that I don't enjoy our little chats, he tells Odin. It's just that I don't, as he is at suggesting the layers of pain and regret that lurk beneath Loki's pining, prideful surface. Given his increased status, it must have been tempting for Feige Alan Taylor and writers Christopher Yost, Christopher Marcus, and Stephen Massey to simply bump up Stan screen time and make this the Thor and Loki show. Yet, for the first hour or so, Loki is kept largely in the smut background, locked away in his super high-tech jail cell, disconnected from the larger story. He doesn't even share a scene with Thor until roughly an hour in. It's only when events spiral out of control, and Thor, back into a corner, turns to his brother for help that we get that Thor and Loki show, and their time together is worth the wait. Whether they're bickering over the controls of a spacecraft or in one more serious showdown, unleashing thousands of years of pent-up hurt and rage, the treatment of Loki here is akin to that of Magneto in X-Men 2. He's still a villain, constantly mocking and taunting his older brother, yet an ambiguous one. And there's a fair bit of dramatic potential in his inner conflict, which leaves it to Christopher Eccleston as Makith, the leader of the Dark Elves, to fill the Loki-shaped hole. The Dark Elves and their groovy spacecraft are visually striking, and they're positioned almost as an Al-Qaeda-type force, a race of fundamentalist warriors whose commitment to their cause is so great that they'll die for it. The prologue sees bombings, but Mleth himself is ultimately a rather bland, generic villain, with Eccleston reduced to growling guttural threats in a made-up language for much of the movie. That said, the final showdown between Thor and Mag is gloriously entertaining. Yes, it's set in a city, London, with the ever-teleogenic Greenwich coming to the fore again. And yes, it features two powerful foes knocking 7 shades out of each other. But this isn't the city-smashing snooze fist that mired Man of Steel's climax. Instead, it's tricksy and inventive, constantly wrong-footing not just the audience but its combatants to great and often genuinely hilarious effect for a movie that has darkened its title and which is a darker people die as Greer as befitting Alan Taylor's Game of Thrones heritage. Thor 2.0 is consistently amusing, and the 3 biggest laughs in the movie all come during this sequence, say a bold gamble when ostensibly the fate of the universe itself is at stake. There are flaws. There are always flaws. There are signs that the story may at one point have been in flux. A potential love triangle between Thor, Jane, and Sif goes nowhere, for example. And it's also packed with the SMG low of fridge moments, those pesky plot holes that will keep you awake at 3 a.m., while its grasp on science, or as Thor would have it magic, is fairly flimsy, with respected actors spouting nonsense about gravitons and wibbly flubs like they're in a 1950s B-movie where no Professor Brian Cox. But it's almost certain to take this year's Bad Movie Science Award. But the whole thing clips along at such a brisk rate at just over 100 minutes, not including credits or post-Reddit stings or post-Reddit stings. It wraps up when most blockbusters are grinding their gears, and is so entertaining that it doesn't seem to matter. Now, that's magic science. It's a weird feeling to see a huge tentpole blockbuster superhero movie like a Thor, The Dark World, and feel like it's just okay. My reactions to these movies are typically much stronger. I'm either way excited at just how well it captures the essence of the comic books on which it is based, or I'm majorly disappointed at just how wrong they get it with the Thor the Dark World. I'm neither. I'm kind of indifferent. I liked a lot of the movie, but there's probably just as much that either doesn't work or doesn't make an impression. The typical model for the superhero movie is that the first movie is a mess, but sets up the hero's origins and lets us get to know the character, while the second movie really lets it rip. A Thor, The Dark World certainly does let it rip, but it's at the expense of the title character. There's a lot here that feels like reading a really fun issue of the comic book, but the fun only lasts until the credits. The movie starts to fade from memory as soon as 10. The fun is transient, feeling less like a movie than just another episode in a Thor TV series. I hope that's not the future for Marvel sequels. In many ways at The Dark World is a big improvement over Kenneth Branagh first author movie from 2011. The sequel feels much less earthbound, taking place in fantastical realms and opening up the scope a great deal. It's a considerably bigger movie. The action is better staged and much more plentiful. There are no scenes as staggeringly awful as the Jeremy Renner Hawkeye insert that was wedged into the original to tie it to the Avengers. Director Alan Taylor, best known for his work on every good cable show you've ever watched, most notably A Game of Thrones, keeps a lot of balls juggling in the air, perhaps too many really, as the film is unfortunately overstead. It's a more entertaining movie than the first, because it never really slows down, and nearly every character gets at least one individual moment to shine. By the time the climax comes, a round in which characters are chasing and fighting one another as they fall through different realms, the movie is finally completely clicking. It's a wonderful sequence and a good way to close out the film on a high. But the sequel sacrifices the best aspect of the original movie, the character of Thor. Whereas most superhero origin movies are about ordinary humans who must learn to be heroes, a Thor had the unique advantage of being about a powerful hero who had to learn how to be human. Thor had an interesting arc in the first movie, and Chris Hemsworth's performance as the brash and arrogant demigod who was humble turned him into a movie star overnight. A Thor the Dark World that doesn't give Thor any such arc. Hardly anyone changes at all as a character in this movie. There's just a bunch of stuff that happens loosely tied together by a filmy plot. Some emotional beats are recycled from the first movie, dulling their impact. The relationships between Thor and his brother Loki undergoes some changes, Loki being the closest the movie has to a dynamic character this time around. But even those developments have a tendency to become undone by comic book magic. While Hemsworth is as charming as ever in the sequel, Thor practically ends up taking a back seat in his own movie. There are just too many other plots and characters to service. The movie is overstuffed, and as a result, can't see characters and plot threads through to where they need to go. It has no idea what to do with Sif and the Warriors 3, and the film is lesser for their absence. CF in particular. What is sacrificed in character is hardly made up in story either. Sure, there is the broad outline of a plot, but it's one that's driven by underdeveloped motivations and lots of convenience. The Dark Elf Makith, Christopher Eccleston, wants the ultimate weapon Zed, called the Ether, because he wants ultimate power. While examining disruptions in the fabric of space, Jane Foster, returning Natalie Portman, dumbed down, needier, and more shrill, is randomly taken to an alternate dimension where she is just as randomly infected by the ether. That means that A, Thor must get it out of her before it kills her, and B, Maka sets his sights on gain. It's a forced way of making Jane matter to the story. And the stakes don't mean as much, because everything that sets up the plot is just happenstance. Mleth and the Dark Elves are only slightly more interesting villains than the Avengers. Generic Chitauri, or to put it back on Asian terms, the Frost Giants. Nearly every good moment in the movie belongs to Tom Hiddleston as Loki, which the filmmakers must have recognized too, as they went back and shot more Loki footage, including a cameo that makes for one of the best moments in the movie. Some of the comic relief also proves problematic. Lightness has been an overall strength of the Marvel movie universe. The movies know how to balance funny moments with genuine thrills and never get bogged down in heavy self-seriousness. The Dark World is no different, offering a couple of really solid laughs. My favorite is when Thor deadpan responds, "Space is fine," and plenty of goofy fun, but now the comic beats spot up somewhat uncomfortably against the movie's more serious moments, making it feel like there are two movies going on at the same time. It doesn't help that the film is overcrowded with characters who exists just to be comic relief. And like with the summers of Iron Man 3, the movie makes the mistake of undercutting its strongest dramatic moment by following it immediately up with jokes. I enjoyed plenty of moments seen at Thor: The Dark World, but it feels a little like a placeholder. I'm still waiting for a truly great Thor movie, as Marvel has so many of the pieces in place, chiefly Chris Hemsworth, to deliver one. What we need is a movie that offers the scope and final thought with the character work of Brannig's film. Then you'd really have something. So the movie feels thin on substance. But when evil elves are flying spaceships around the mystical realm of Asgard and firing lasers at demigods, it's hard not to give yourself over to the goofy energy. As a longtime comic book reader, it's one thing to be rewarded with a movie in which Spider-Man swings around New York. It's quite another to be rewarded with a movie that doubles down on the cosmic fantasy that once seemed only possible in the pages of Marvel's finest. A Thor: The Dark World that is only possible because Marvel has built towards the moment in which audiences would accept a movie this nerdy that's worth getting excited over, even when much of the movie isn't ''T". I enjoyed plenty still waiting for a truly great Thor movie, as Marvel has so many of the pieces in place, chiefly Chris Hemsworth, to deliver one. What we need is a movie that offers the scope and final thought with the character work of Brannig's film. Then you'd really have something. So the movie feels thin on substance, but when evil elves are flying spaceships around the mystical realm of Asgard and firing lasers at demigods, it's hard not to give yourself over to the goofy energy. As a longtime comic book reader, it's one thing to be rewarded with a movie in which Spider-Man swings around New York. It's quite another to be rewarded with a movie that doubles down on the cosmic fantasy that once seemed only possible in the pages of Marvel's finest. A Thor: The Dark World that is only possible because Marvel has built towards the moment in which audiences would accept a movie this nerdy. That's worth getting excited over, even when much of the movie isn't ''T". As we've mentioned before, among all of the current Marvel properties, at least those that fall within the current Avengers C-centric universe, a Thor is perhaps the toughest sell. Instead of super soldiers and robots and powered suits, we have gods and monsters and magical realms, all somehow wrapped within this framework of our existing reality-based superhero pantheon. As a result, Kenneth Branagh probably made a wise choice by focusing on Thor's crisp Hemsworth presence on Earth and his burgeoning relationship with Jane Foster, Natalie Portman, and Thea 2011 entry. Indeed, the first film's weakest moments were those that took place in his homeworld of Asgard, in no small part because Asgard never felt real. It's not that audiences can't buy a fantasy setting, even one juxtaposed with our existing world. It's that Asgard simply felt poorly rendered, like a clumsy aping of Rivendell during an acid trip, coupled with the fact that the Asgardian dialogue was often a bit clunky. Tony Stark's "Doth Mother Know You Wear with Her Drapes" line was a bit too close to home, and it's no surprise that the scenes in New Mexico were the better ones. However, in Thor: The Dark World, a Game of Thrones as a director, Alan Taylor now has the advantage of the scene being set and of audiences accepting the peculiarities of these pseudo-gods and can therefore take that ball and run. The new film is focused heavily on Asgard, and thanks to some terrific set design and visual effects, it's actually quite stunning this time around. A sparkling, lush, substantial-seeming world that has far more life breathed into it than before. In this second go-round, Jane Foster stumbles upon a millennia-old substance known as the ether, capable of all sorts of terrible things. The ether is being sought by Molokath Christopher Eccleston, a dark elf who has been around since the dawn of time, who seeks to use it to bring eternal darkness to all of the universe's realms, thanks to a moment in time when all the worlds will be closest to each other, called the Convergence. Yes, this is all utter gobbledygook. And no, watching it doesn't actually help it make more sense. It's preposterous, fantastically comic booky, science fiction, fantasy foofery, and by God, do they sell it hard. A Thor, the dark world that is filled to bursting with weird wordplay and stern, solemn proclamations of magical silliness, so much so that it occasionally drives itself off the rails, and yet when you add up its parts, it works and works well afar, more often than it fails. This is in no small part due to the game efforts of Hemsworth, Anthony Hopkins as the effortlessly noble Odin, and the earthbound contingent of Portman's Jane, as well as her sidekick and surprisingly effective comic relief, Kat Dennings as Darcy. The chemistry between Hemsworth and Portman is solid now, with the added wrinkle of the fact that a she has been brought to Asgard, and B, she's in some ways the reason all of this chaos has come into play. Hemsworth is still a giant, charming lug of a fellow who, after 3 films, now seamlessly portrays the spectacularly powerful god of thunder with a plum and surprising wry humor that nicely complements his newfound maturity. The supporting players are all enjoyable as well, including an all-too-brief turn by Renee, so as Thor's mother Freya, and a strong, understated mess. And that's saying something, considering he plays a golden-armored magical gatekeeper. Performance by Adris Alba as Himnel. Sadly, once again, the parts of Sif Heem Alexander and the Warriors 3 race. Stevenson as V-Stag Tadu as Hogan, and newcomer Zachary Levi taking over as Fandral are underused yet again. But it's a crowded scene in there. If there's a weak spot, it's the villain. Eccleston, an extremely charismatic and versatile actor, is utterly wasted as Makith, buried under prosthetics and with his voice mangled by effects. Any possibility of nuance or creativity is utterly stifled. Instead, he's simply evil for the sake of evil. A marble-mouthed, emotionless automaton who is never even remotely compelling or even particularly fearsome. Thankfully, Tom Hiddleston's Loki is there to pick up the slack. This time around, Loki has been imprisoned after his destructive efforts seen at the Avengers, and he's now freed by Thor to help him trap Malek. Hiddleston slides into the role of looking like he's been doing it all his life, and he is evil, malicious, complex, tragic, and utterly spectacular. He's easily the best part of the film. Between his viciously sarcastic barbs to his amazingly expressive face, to his ability to squeeze every last drop of conniving cleverness out of the role while still giving it remarkable depth. In the hands of a lesser talent, Loki would be reduced to a scenery-chewing buffoon or one-note manus. In Hiddleston's stance, he's a multi-layered lunatic, and I could watch him all day woven into this weird, occasionally confusing, ridiculous story, and these mostly delightful performances is a thoroughly enjoyable, breathlessly paced film. The first film suffered from a bit of lag as much time was spent on exposition and world building. With those things already established at the Dark World is able to move at a much faster clip, and it basically explodes right off the blocks. It's a far more action-packed epic, with much of the storytelling being done on the flight or woven deftly into the major action pieces. The action itself is mostly excellent, particularly a stunningly rendered assault on Asgard itself and a wild mind-warping and often hilarious battle between Thor and Makath and his forces that involves London, a spaceship, and frequent boats of random, accidental, interdimensional teleportation. It has to be seen to be believed, but while the film isn't always making a ton of sense, it's never boring. Best of all, the action is well designed and clearly and cleverly thought out. There's excellent use of space and perspective, and you can actually saw what's happening without it being edited into oblivion. Thor, the dark world that occasionally suffers from a needlessly complex and wacky story, and a villain that fails to resonate or be even remotely memorable. But by God, it is a fun. Taylor has directed the massive, wildly ambitious entry into this universe, and he's done a bang-up job. Much like Iron Man 3, it's essentially a standalone entry with little more than passing references to the other films, with only a glorious exception that I refuse to spoil. However, the stakes are vast and the characters are all suitably overwhelmed and willing to go the distance to stop the threat. Everyone is playing their part enthusiastically. The action is often flat-out bananas, and every second of Tom Hiddleston is wonderfully wicked. Joy. For those reasons alone, it beats out its predecessor and is absolutely worth a couple of hours of your life. Even in a shared cinematic universe that features super soldiers and men who transform into giant green monsters when they get a bit cross, Thor always seemed like a bit of an outsider when it came to becoming an iconic film character. Injecting Norse mythology into Marvel's more science fiction-orientated world seemed like it would be destined to lead to a work of disastrous camp. While Kenneth Branagh's Thor was a somewhat divisive film, with some saying its goofy sense of humor went too far in deflating the pomposity of its faux Shakespearean stylings, and others, myself included, saying that it struck just the right balance between the two. Its main success was in establishing Thor, played with sly wit and bountiful charisma by Chris Hemsworth, as believable if larger-than-life character, and it took him on an interesting journey from arrogant god to humble, worthy hero. The downside of taking Thor on that journey in the first film presents itself fairly early on in the Alan Taylor-directed CQ. Much of what made the first film such fun was the fact that it was a fish-out-of-water comedy, in which a man who cavorts around like a Viking has to figure out modern-day Earth. While there are glimmers of the old Thor in Hemsworth's performance, particularly in an early battle scene in which he dispatches his enemies with the rice smile, he's a more stoic, brooding presence than he was before, intent on mooning over his distant love, Jane Foster, Natalie Portman, then the business of preparing to rule the realm of Asgard in the stead of his father, Odin, Anthony Hopkins. Thor, The Dark World follows the lead of its protagonist by being an altogether more serious offering than its predecessor. Taylor, a veteran television director who is probably best known for his work on The Sopranos, and more apropos for the world of Thor Game of Thrones, tones down most of the excesses of Bren's Asgard, making it less Delo and chintzy, in favor of more somber autumnal hues. It's not a bad decision considering that much more of the story takes place on Asgard this time around, and the old colors would have become headache-inducing if exposed to for too long. But it is underlined the sense that the series is rapidly heading further away from the light touch that made the first film so enjoyable. Not that the film is entirely without the sense of fun, but it's contained mainly to the scenes on Earth where Jane and her intern Darcy Cat Dennings investigate bizarre gravitational anomalies similar to those that appeared when Thor first arrived on Earth. This ties into the broader plot, which sees a group of long-banished dark elves led by Christopher Eccleston under pounds of makeup seeking to take advantage of a convergence of the 9 different realms to conquer them all. But it's mainly an opportunity for Portman Dennings and Still and Skarsgård Dean Road to play the cheerful support team to Thor, complete with scenes of Skarsgård Dean Road running naked around Stonehenge and Portman engaging in an obviously doomed relationship with Chris Odo. The other font of humor in this film comes in the form of Tom Hiddleston's Loki, returning as a Hannibal Lecter figure who offers a little quid pro quo in order to help defeat the Dark Elves. As was the case in Thor and the Avengers, Easton energizes the screen pretty much every second that he is on it, purely because he's clearly having such a good time being bad and watching him gleefully run circles around everyone else is hugely entertaining. Unfortunately, he's sidelined for much of the film, and whenever he is included, it only serves to highlight just how bland the actual villains are. It probably wouldn't have been wise to have him be the main villain in 3 consecutive films, but it does mean that his main role is to save the film from its somewhat glump first hour, rather than to help bolster an all-around entertaining experience. However, once Loki truly enters the fray, Thor, the Dark World does gel into something much more satisfying. The plot remains murky, the Dark Elves uninteresting, and the tone generally a bit morose, but it does develop a fantastic energy that propels it to its climax with great zest. In particular, The action is very well staged and makes good use of the aforementioned anomalies, allowing for some witty, physics-defying sequences. Even at its low points, Hemsworth and the cast keep things moving. It's just a shame that the film takes over an hour to become the sort of fun blockbuster that the first film was from the start. True to my nature as an optimist, however, I will highlight the positive points of the new production. First, Chris Hemsworth is the perfect choice to play the stoic, unemotional, dispassionate, apathetic, unmoved Nordic leading deity to a T. Actually, I'm not sure these are good points. It does not require a whole lot of animation to jump from the sky, punch someone out, or throw a hammer. Hemsworth does a very good job in his portrayal of such a character, and as long as he does not try to break the acting ceiling like he did in Snow White and the Huntsman, I think we'll be all right. The other good thing about this movie, and it's probably the best, is Lucky Tom Hiddleston, Midnight in Paris, the deeply troubled younger, and let's not forget adopted brother of the first prince of Asgard. It's his third appearance in the role, and he has grown quite comfortable as the smirking, conniving schemer. Here he makes every scene he's in delectable. It's too bad he is not in more. Plus, the sequences where he appears with Hemsworth are not only the best in the picture, but they elevate the latter's status and acting credentials even higher than they should be. Okay, we have discussed the positive. Now let's look at the concerns. Replacing first installment director Kenneth Branagh, who was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Director A and Lead Actor A for 1989's. Henry V eliminated the whole Shakespearean angle with The Fallen Brother, The Troubled Prince, and World Where King, which punctuated the action scenes and made for much more intelligent viewing than your average superhero narrative. Alan Taylor, while adept at television drama, several installments of Mad Men, Game of Thrones, and a host of others, has not helmed a feature film since Kill the Poor in 2003. His contribution to this feature A, at least as far as the Bard connection goes. A is negligible, and thus much of the drama of Thor is replaced with the mediocre of standard fights, screaming, and explosions. Yes, a Thor. The Dark World looks good, but there is a troubling blandness and sameness to the Enterprise. Sadly underused or misused in some cases are Anthony Hopkins' Red 2 as King Odin, Natalie Portman, Black Swan, Stalin Skerkin Road, the girl with the dragon tattoo as Dr. Eric Salvig, and Christopher Eccleston, G.I. Joe The Rise of Cobra as the main villain. Hey, that's right, Loki isn't even too top bad guy here, a moth. Hopkins is given even less screen time than in the first film. While Portman and moans and nags so much about Thor being away, one understands his reasoning completely. She is both bland and annoying, a difficult tight trope Megarium's Wonder Emporium for a perfect example. Meanwhile, Skarsgård Road has been reduced to a comic relief buffoon, and Eccleston, who began his career in 1991 in a great little British film, Let Him Have It, is easily one of the worst villains of all time. Sort of a lightweight Bane, but without the menacing demeanor, heavily made up and CGI'd to the point of complete obscurity. He comes back after failing numerous times in the past to use the all-powerful ether to blow all of the realms to pieces for whatever that's worth. The best spy-worn superhero movies have one thing in common: a great and terrifying bad guys. Goldfinger, Darth Vader, Lex Luthor, Loki Mleet is certainly a name we'll remember in the annals of film's evil malefactors. Few will remember the plot of Faith or The Dark World as well. Basically, Oscar is under assault from Mole, and Thor is forced to release Loki from prison, where he has been since the end of the Avengers, to aid in the protection of the realms. The real drama is whether the kid brother can be trusted. Seems a logical concern to me. There are trips to other planets, and Earth gets a few location shots. Monsters are destroyed, good guys are pounded, and for a while we wonder if anyone can survive the onslaught of out-of-control special effects. One funny sequence involves Thor and Mleth bouncing around the universe, while the mighty hammer of the Norse god struggles vainly just to keep up with the action. The Dark World 2013, directed by Alan Taylor, starring Chris Hemsworth, Natalie Portman, Tom Hiddleston. Abs faced with an enemy that even Odin and Asgard cannot withstand. Thor must embark on his most perilous and personal journey yet, one that will reunite him with Jane Foster and force him to sacrifice everything to save us all at Thor. The Dark World is a good sequel, managing to surpass the first Thor film. Maybe it's because this one isn't bogged down by an original story, or maybe it's because the filmmakers have found a solid footing with Thor after the Avengers. But this Thor film felt like it had more to offer. The story seemed more cohesive and the characters had more dimension. Thor must fight a race of dark elves who ruled the universe thousands of years ago. These creatures were originally prevented from restoring the world to darkness by Thor's grandfather. The enemy story is a little generic, but the dark elves look striking enough to be memorable. The uniforms of the soldier elves are definitely freaky. They are after the ether, a power source that happens to come into contact with Jane Foster and is absorbed into her body. Thor takes her to Asgard to protect her and figure out how to keep it away from the dark elves who have been reawakened by the ether's activity. This was a good time to release a sequel to Thor because of Loki's position after the Avengers. Perhaps it is because I have watched the Avengers a couple times since it left theaters, but Loki's attack on Earth is still fresh in my mind. His snark also fills a void left by Thor's serious daft attitude that was originally relieved by some of the other Avengers. This puts him in a good spot as someone you root for during the movie, despite his questionable motives, adding a lot of depth to the story. Again, the environments that were created for the film are magnificent. The scenery and the lore of the Thor really add a lot to the movie overall. Also, Anthony Hopkins seems more invested in his role this time around. Not to say he didn't act well in the first film. He just seems more like his old self. After not seeing Natalie Portman in any movies since the first of Thor up, it was nice just to watch her in something again. Her and Thor don't have the most solid romantic base, but her and Hemsworth make it work. The film gives her a chance to put her scientist skills to work in this finale, so it's not just Thor saving the world on his own. Thor: The Dark World is one of my favorite Marvel movies. If you have enjoyed any of the other movies by the studio, I would recommend giving the new Thor watch. It is a fun theater film, and would have been right at home during the summer lineup if Iron Man 3A hadn't taken that spot. Diving into Phase 2 of the Marvel Cinematic's Grow universe in 2013, the year of stacked comic book movie started with the Iron Man 3A and ended with another sequel featuring another Avengers member, Thor: The Dark World. Although the original Thor from 2011 might be a hit-or-miss origin story for some, I still think it was fun enough that'll hopefully lead to something better. Just 2 years later, the hype was there for the cosmic follow-up, as it was one of my most anticipated blockbusters of the fall movie season. Many had the expectations that this would be an improvement over its predecessor, and when I enjoyed it, I also hoped this would be better. And when I saw it opening weekend, my initial reaction was good. Didn't love it, but after watching it again for the third time now, it's not terrible. It was just one of those Marvel films that's very underwhelmed. In ancient times, the gods of Asgard fought and won a war against an evil race known as the Dark Elves. The survivors were neutralized, and their ultimate weapon at the ether was buried in a secret location. Hundreds of years later, Jane Foster Natalie Portman finds the ether and becomes a host, forcing Thor, Chris Hemsworth, to bring her to Asgard before dark elf Makath Christopher Eccleston captures her and uses the weapon to destroy the 9 realms, including Earth Thor. The Dark World is a movie that has shades of fun thrown in here, and shades that made it feel rather dull to even remember. There are some elements that are improved much more than last time. For instance, I appreciated how there's more time dedicated in Asgard because majority of the first installment was on Earth, where Thor didn't have his powers and has to learn a lesson. This lets you know it won't be a problem this time, since you get a lot of action in Asgard in different places in the universe to please everybody. This phase explores more of the sci-fi fantasy realm with what's to come in a grounded fashion. Later on, as they attach director Alan Taylor to take over for Kenneth Branagh, he might be a good eye for depicting fantasy worlds since he directed several Game of Thrones as episodes. He's able to make everything in this world beautiful looking. That said, Taylor's direction in keeping the tradition of making the sequel darker felt like an elective class that sounds interesting on paper, only to find out it's not as exciting as you wanted it to be. Just waiting to get excellent. I've always thought of this as a movie, and the way it was executed now was the only to pave towards the next Avengers sequel to further along. Cutter superhero fluff to pass the time that doesn't require detailed depth or have many moments of amazement on screen. When it's there, it gives the movie the needed energy, but the rest feels tiring, and that shouldn't be the case for a film featuring Thor. I don't know if it was a rush production process to put this out too, but I sense a lack of attachment over a few elements, or it didn't have me that interested in a more predictable film than before. Chris Hemsworth puts on the armor and carries the mighty hammer for the third time now, and he still elevates his performances to have us know he doesn't need the other Avengers to tag along with on his latest adventure yet. Thor might not be the first character to think of her reliability in this world, and being a God to protect everyone. Still, his embodiment of him stays true despite this not furthering the character as much. Natalie Portman returns to give an acceptable performance as Jane Foster. But unfortunately, while I didn't mind the chemistry between her character and Thor from their last interaction, they didn't care for their romance here. This made me question why the script needed Jane to return besides serving as the plot's damsel. But if everybody loves one character in the movie, that's the scene stealer. That's Loki. They knew we loved him from the other appearances, especially after reigning chaos of the Avengers, thinking he's in the right to achieve greatness. Aurelia wanted more of him since the first half has him imprisoned, but Tom Hiddleston's performance still makes us believe he's impossible to know if he'll betray those around him. Once Thor had to team up with his adopted brother, those brotherly moments for a little vengeance are genuinely great since both actors work so well together. When reshoots occurred, more scenes of Loki were added, even changing the ending not to have him killed off. But by far the biggest problem with the film is unfortunately the villain, while lacked from seeing this in theaters to even now. I still consider him the worst villain inside the MCU, because as much as we usually know the franchise for its lackluster bad guys, this is a prime example. All he's made out to be is a generic one-dimensional dark elf who wants control of the ether and covers the world in darkness. Never once did I find him to have a real threatening presence for our hero. Interestingly enough, they offered Mads Mikkelsen the part first, but he starred in Thea Hannibal TV series instead. Honestly, I found Loki to be evil than him or his Lieutenant Curse, a dual Kinag beige, since he was more involved with the action when he literally turned into beast mode. Christopher Eccleston has since expressed his disappointment with his role, saying they cut many of his character's backstory out of the finished film. Just seems like he was taking a paycheck with the G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra. With the rest of this supporting cast, they were again suitable for the material they were working from. From Anthony Hopkins as Odin, Idris Elba making him more of a badass this time. Jamie Alexander, who I'd love to more of as Sif, and Rene Russo got a bit more to do as Queen Freya. The other aspect I couldn't stand was the humor. This might have been the first MCU movie where I noticed the comedy falling flat, and a large chunk of the comic relief comes from Kat Dennings as Darcy Lewis. I like Dennings as Darcy. She was annoying throughout, and I was waiting for the Earth scenes to be done because there was no need for her, especially with her and her Tyrion Jonathan Howard. However, I thought there were a couple of chuckle-worthy moments, including one of my favorite Marvel cameos. The action sequences are well directed and more vastly different from the original, especially since we see more of Thor kicking ass, and the visual effects hold up 9 years later. Were the stakes high? Not really. They didn't blow me away. The climax made it cool, involving portals around vast universes in Greenwich. That's pretty creative, but you aren't caring about the fight with Thor and Moleth when the outcome is already known. Of all the movies to have come out in the saga, Thor: The Dark World is usually placed near of every Marvel ranking, which shouldn't be a surprise. The mixed positive reception didn't affect the box office. $26.3 million domestic, $644.7 million worldwide, yet it currently sits at 66% on Rotten Tomatoes, the second lowest rated MCU film. The most interesting tidbit was that of Wonder Woman. A director, Patty Jenkins, was attached to direct at one point, with our Romeo-Juliet-inspired plot in mind. As she left due to creative differences, and Portman stayed on despite joining the project because of Jenkins' involvement in another universe. I would have loved to see her movie, but besides, Hemsworth recently said to Vanity Fair that it disappointed him how he thought he didn't grow with the character. Taylor was disappointed with the finished film and blamed Marvel for changes he didn't like. He said there's a director's cut out there, but nobody cares at this point. I walked in the theater with high expectations while cushioning my heart for failure. The first Thor movie had me making googly eyes at the Norse god of thunder, and by natural law of transitivity to Chris Hemsworth. Thor's stint at that epic movie mashup that is Thea Vanders solidified my fandom, and thanks to his charismatic, intelligent portrayal in both movies and the actor's charming Twitter antics and appearances, my affection grew for the god of mischief, Aloya, and by the same transitive law, a Tom Hiddleston. Historically, with that much bias and high hopes, disappointment is sure to follow. Add to that the slew of trailers released for Thor: The Dark World. The sneak peek of the visuals were definitely breathtaking. The action scenes orchestrated to be massive, with Thor and Jane Foster reunited at last. I feared the film will fall back on those elements. ACG effects, winding action sequences, a flimsy love angle, all held up by a soup of a story. Thor: The Dark World's success is built on the harmonic marriage between its greatest tacit, the literally epic realms wherein Thor and the Asgardian live and prosper, and the mortal human relationships that somehow makes everything believable. Udina claims we are not gods, and as the film moves, you believe him. Thor is not invulnerable. His hammer, Mjolnir, is not invincible. Odin, though, the All-Father, is not God omniscient and ever-wise, and was actually revealed to be narrow-minded, arrogant, and discriminating at his worst. The characters have to make choices and sacrifices, just like any mortal. Ahim Vandralaga and the Lady Tsifa chose to reason in full tester in support of Thor. Sif chose to look past her unrequited love and take up her warrior's spear instead. A queen of Phrygia, as brave spar with them. All obviously had no wholly triumphant end, but still I was hopeful, until the blade slid through her flesh. Since I speak of hope, this might be the best segue to the most important relationship of all in the film. The Avengers' triumph in New York ended with Loki, a master diva of the evil plot, in shackles, and behind Asian bars, we see him unrepentant, unaffected by Odin's might and venom, but we see that Frigga can reach him with Odin, and maybe even Thor could not, and there sparks the flicker of hope when Thor approaches him with a thinly sealed pact. Thor's frankness about his complete lack of trust of him. An absent desire to grieve for their common loss could have been the best way to approach the sly Loki. Thor made it known to Loki that he is stronger, wiser, less gullible than before. But when they were playing out the plot together, Thor and Loki's bickering and natural chemistry showed that their bond lies deeper than both would recognize. Loki's willingness to lend his talents and magic to Thor's cause to protect Jane and fight for them reveals the slim possibility that he may not be too far gone. Yes, I say that even with how the film ended. Dotane's relationship with Thor, central in the first film, is a crucial plotline here too, albeit less so than Loki's. Their easy chemistry and strong attraction that went beyond realms anchored the film to Earth, pun intended. I liked it that Jane, though not a warrior princess like Sif, was not the typical damsel in distress. She is intelligent, confident, and brave enough to hold her own, even in front of Asgardian royalty. Although she started the movie as a host to one of the most menacing energies in the universe, Thor could not have saved the Nine Realms without her scientific genius and her team. That said, the film benefits greatly from its stellar cast, led by the charismatic, much-improved Chris Hemsworth, who brings the God of Thunder to realistic life, flanked by superstars, and Natalie Portman, Anthony Hopkins, Rene Russo, Christopher Eccleston, Stellan Skarsgård, among many others, and of course the one and only Tom Hiddleston, a Thor. The Dark World was equipped with more than CGI to deliver. Marvella movie magic. Is this still my bias word? Definitely. This review is my personal opinion after all. But if I have managed to entice you to watch a Thor, The Dark World, then my work here is done. See you again for a Captain America the Winter Soldier and X-Men Days of Future Past. As I had stated in my review of Iron Man 3, I had assumed that the release of the 2012 blockbuster at the Avengers would signal the end of Marvel's multi-film saga about the group of comic book heroes and their government allies shelled. Not only DA Iron Man 3A proved me wrong, but also the recent television series Agents of SHIELD and the second movie about the God of Thunder, Aor, The Dark World, like the 2011 movie. Aor, this latest film begins thousands of years ago, back in Day or Year B. The father of Odin clash with the dark elves of Spartum and their leader, Mleth, who seeks to destroy the universe, using a weapon known as the Ether. After conquering Mleth's forces, hides the Ether within a stone column. He was also so unaware that Maketh, his lieutenant, Algrim, and a handful of dark elves have managed to escape by going into suspended animation. Many years later, Thorn and his fellow Asgardians, which include his friends, Lady Sif, Vandral, and Volstagg, helped their comrade Hogun repel marauders on the latter's homeworld, Vanaheim. It proves to be the last battle in a war to pacify the 9 realms which had fallen into chaos following the destruction of the Bifrate till to Pilgro Street. And in London, astrophysicist Dr. Jane Foster is led by her intern Darcy Lewis and latter's intern to an abandoned factory where objects have begun to disobey the laws of physics by disappearing into thin air. Jane is teleported to another world where she is infected by the ether. Both the Asgardians and Jane's former mentor, Dr. Eric Selvig, learn on separate occasions that the convergence, a rare alignment of the 9 realms, is imminent. While the event approaches, portals, one of which Jane had fallen into, linking the worlds, appear at random. Alerts Thor of Jane's recent disappearance, leading the latter to search for her on Earth. When she inadvertently releases an unearthly force upon a group of London policemen, Thor takes her to Asgard. Unfortunately, the Asgardian healers do not know how to treat her. Odin, recognizing the ether, warns Jane's infection will kill her given enough time, and that the ether's return heralds a catastrophic prophecy. Unbeknownst to Odin, the re-emergence of the ether also ends the Dark Elves' suspended animation and revives their determination to use the substance to darken the universe. Thor, The Dark World has proven to be a major box office since its release nearly a month ago. This is not surprising, considering the enormous success of Marvel's Avengers saga. Iron Man 3, set 6 months after the events of the 2012 film, also proved to be a big hit. Some people have claimed that the first film about Thor was superior. As much as I had enjoyed it, Thor, I cannot say that I would agree. It required just a bit too much of a superhero origin tale. Personally, I found the plot for a Thor, The Dark World, and more satisfying. Mind you, this second God of Thunder movie did not strike me as perfect. It had a few flaws. Although I applaud director Alan Taylor and cinematographer Kramer Morgan, Thor's expansion of the Acid setting beyond the Royal Palace and the Biff freight to Pilgro Street, the latter's photography for that particular setting seemed to lack Harris Zambaro's dazzling and colorful photography from the 2011 film. Instead, there seemed to be a slightly dull cast to Morgan's photography of Asgard. And some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.